Welcome to the Health Stuff You Need to Know podcast. Information you need to thrive in our toxic modern world. I'm your host, Scott W. Kirkland. I hope you're ready because it is go time with the Wellness Web. Yeah.
Today's guest is Marcy Moberg. She is a mindfulness and art of being expert. She works with individuals and organizations on how to manage stress, find their center, stay positive, and realize their true potential. She has been featured on the Huffington Post and is a contributor on thriveglobal.com and lifehack.org. Marcy has been interviewed for her expertise on News 4, WSA 9, and News Channel 8 in Washington, D.C., and the podcast Positive Phil. Prior to this, Marcy spent 9 years traveling the world as a conflict resolution expert for USAID. While there, she completed her master's degree at George Mason University and doctoral coursework in conflict analysis and resolution. Despite having a tenured government job that she loved, Marcy felt unfulfilled until she discovered her purpose to empower others to create more joyful lives. After years, she worked up the courage to resign to follow her dream of working full-time to transform people's lives. Today, Marcy has reached thousands of people through consultations, weekly classes, workshops, trainings, and speaking engagements. Well, welcome to the show, Marcy.
Thank you so much. I'm so delighted to be here.
I'm glad to have you here as well. All right. So I usually like to start the show. I ask people, my guests, about a health challenge that they had and if they were willing to share it, because I find it adds a lot of value because everyone has pretty much had a health challenge in their life. So what do you have to share with us today?
Yeah, I love this question, Scott, because I think you're exactly right. Many people, pretty much anyone I know, for the most part, has had a health challenge or probably will face a health challenge in their life. And when I think about a health challenge, probably the most significant, impactful one for me is something that I would call basically a soul misalignment. And it's this recognition from the mind and the body, basically, that the mind and the body the health starting to deteriorate as a sign from something deeper inside of us that we're not aligned and on a path that's going to support us to thrive. And for me, as you kind of mentioned a little bit in my bio, that really was a recognition that despite having achieved what I would basically consider the American dream at a very young age in my early 20s, I was married, I owned a house, I had a tenured government job. Tenured government jobs at the time were very rare and people saw those positions as very coveted. And I also was attending one of the best graduate programs in the world for my field. So it was quite puzzling to me to discover that I was very unhappy. And it made no sense to me because as a person, I basically consider myself to be pretty easily optimistic. I have faced a lot of health challenges throughout my life and other challenges as well, and able to overcome them. So it made no sense to me that I could have what otherwise from the outside looked like the perfect life and feel completely unhappy. And I also had, with this sense of unhappiness, once I really started recognizing that, also a lot of physical challenges started showing up. I started having digestive problems. I had just a lot of challenges that doctors, quite frankly, couldn't understand and couldn't explain. I was having eye infections on a monthly basis. My allergies were out of control. I was having to get steroid injections to get my allergies under control because it was essentially like my body was kind of attacking itself. It was overreacting to everything. And for a long time, I treated it as just a physical problem, to be honest. And then there was this light bulb that went off inside of me one day when I was sitting at home, and I really saw how much of a sense of what I would call apathy had developed for me. And I knew that something deeper inside of me was kind of calling out. And I think a lot of us think of chronic stress as showing up as, short-tempered, anger, frustration. But I often see it quite regularly in my clients that apathy is sometimes the number one symptom that comes up for people that's a sign of chronic stress. And what I would say is really the underlying root of that, underlying chronic stress, underlying a lot of physical challenges, is this really wise part of ourselves, this intuitive part of ourselves that we often get disconnected from as adults. We're usually very connected to it and in tune with it as children. But as we grow older, we get disconnected from it, and then we start to follow the beliefs that other people have of us, the expectations we develop or form and others form of us, the societal norms and cultural norms, and those start to weigh on us more than our internal compass. And when that starts to weigh on us more than following our internal compass, things start to fall apart. And I had been doing that for years without even recognizing it. And by the way, it was very hard for me to recognize it because not only did I have the life that people, I think, quite often dream of, but I also was on a really strong spiritual seeking path. So I also was very strongly connected to my spirituality, and I was spending a lot of time focusing on questions of spirit. But still, the question of my alignment and my purpose was not something I had considered. And it really came for me when I had that moment at home and I recognized, okay, something's off. And from that point forward, I just started furiously opening myself up to questioning everything. And eventually I got led to meditation and mindfulness, which helped opening my mind up even further, had me start really questioning the thoughts I was investing my energy in, how I was understanding myself, how I believed who I was and what I should be doing with my life. I hired a life coach and worked with her for many, many years. I did acupuncture. I hired energy healers. I worked with shamans. I changed my diet. So I just basically went, all hands on deck. Because I recognized that while I had been investing in my spiritual path, I really actually hadn't been fully investing in what I would say is my whole self. And I think that's the case for many of us. I recognized that I was really in this state of survival, of just getting by and thinking, well, it'll get better in the future, or this is just a mood and an experience that will shift. And through the power of really working through some really talented healers, teachers, and a coach, I learned the skills that I think we just don't learn, to be honest, and how to really start re-empowering myself and stepping into my personal power, and then really listening to that intuitive voice that led me to the work that I do today.
It sounds like you went on a major transformational journey. Was there you
Yes.
did acupressure, shamanism. Is there something in particular that really helped you, or was it just a summation of all? Or I'm wondering, because I'm really interested in giving tips for my audience to help them out. And is there something what would you, after going all through that, where would you suggest someone start if they felt that in their life they didn't have that passion and purpose that we all so much really desire, and really, honestly, we need it, because if we're not happy in our lives, we can't really be healthy in the long run.
Yes. I mean, I think the first place I would start is twofold. One is meditation. The beautiful thing about meditation now, as opposed to when I first started meditating, is there's so many resources out there now that people can tap into, like free apps that people can download, like Insight Meditation is a free app that people can use. And there are thousands of guided meditations on there of varying different lengths and topics and styles that people can use, or they could just use the timer itself and meditate in silence. There are, lots of amazing books out there. A really wonderful book is The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, which really explains, what is it really in the power of now? What do we mean by the power now? Why is it change? Why is it a game changer for us when we start to focus on being in the present? What does that actually mean? Like connecting to your breath. So I think meditation really is the first place to start because it's one of the few scientifically proven techniques that we know now that actually has the power to rewire your brain. And that's really what I had to do over a period of time, is rewire my brain. And as I rewired my brain and realigned myself and started knowing and learning how to listen to my intuition, then I was able to actually start moving forward. So meditation is a good place to start. I always recommend to clients to journal. I think journaling is critical. One of the biggest obstacles I see to people that's really a huge contributor to physical health challenges is that they're not actually processing their emotional feelings in a skillful way. Most of us are not taught the skills on how to process our emotions. And so most of us stuff them away and or totally buy into them and then just are reacting all the time. And so doing something like investing in meditation, investing in journaling, like free writing, where you just simply write for the sake of just writing, like you're emptying your stream of consciousness onto the page without editing at all, and just making a regular practice of that for like 10 minutes a day, something like that, can really start to shift things, because then you start actually creating space. And then if people have the resources to, I highly recommend they invest in, a coach, a life coach, or a teacher, or a skilled like mental health professional, like a therapist, to really get someone who can be there as a third party, who's neutral, who can ask the right questions to help you find the answers. Because that's really a skill that we're not taught. And through that process, we can start to learn some inquiry about how do we actually start to examine feelings when they're coming up and resolve them in a skillful way. Because most of the time now that I do energy work with people, a lot of physical symptoms that show up is just honestly emotional energy that's just trapped inside, that hasn't been released, expressed, cleared out in a very skillful way.
I'm curious about actually the energy medicine and the coaching. I think I'll start with the coaching. Now, coaching is becoming fairly popular now, my understanding, and I understand a lot of like large corporations use it, and over and over again because they're getting really good results. I've never used a coach personally, but I have a friend who used a coach, and he said he got great results from it. Actually, a couple friends, one for like personal reasons and the other for business, and they both had great results. So can you kind of explain what the coaching process is like and how it helps people?
Sure. Yeah. So I would say, the coaching process for different types of coaches is different, but in the essence behind it is being a support to ask people, to turn people towards the right questions that they need to consider, that supports them to get clarity in and of themselves. So, for example, it's different than going to a coach versus going to a teacher. If you go to, for example, any sort of meditation teacher or a consultant, they will actually give you specific suggestions and recommendations. But coaches really have the unique skill to be able to guide people through a process of inquiry that helps them to get the right answers. They're answers that are most in alignment with themselves. And so it's through a process of questions. And I think the other powerful thing for coaching is that it's action oriented. It's really oriented around how do you translate your clarity that you now have into action. And I think that's where people get stuck the most is, one, how do I find clarity in the first place? How do I understand why I'm feeling like my life is off? And then two, how do I actually get skill on taking action forward? And through the process of coaching, you really learn that you need to be clear about who you want to be and embody that. And then from that place of really clear intention, you take action, and you take action that is actually measurable and doable. Because most of the times, the other thing we do is we take action steps that are ill-defined and are nebulous or too big. I don't know, for example, say, okay, well, I want to write a book, and then we just leave it extremely wide and vast. But let's say you want to write a book. If you work through a coach, then the coach will ask you the right questions to get you clarity on, well, what exactly do you want to write your book on? And what is your timeline? And let's break it down into smaller pieces. What are each of the steps to get there? Who would you need to be the person at the end that has the successful book? And can you start being that person today? How would you embody those qualities in your everyday life starting from today? So it's very concrete.
Okay. And I also understand there's a bit of a I guess because you have multiple sessions, and I think part of it is because you're checking in frequently. So it's not like you kind of get started and then you just kind of put it to the shelf. But if you have another meeting with your coach and you agreed to, do, steps forward for your goals, and then, but if you have that coach there and they're coming, then it's okay. I better actually do what I said I'm going to do, right? So
yes, absolutely. It's an accountability mechanism, and certainly people can. A lot of times people will, ask me, okay, well, what's the difference between, I don't know, a coach and a best friend? Well, you could, it's very rare that you would have a best friend that's able to actually remain neutral when you're talking about something. Most of our friends and family are very emotionally invested in our lives. They're very emotionally invested. They have their own baggage, their own beautiful baggage, their own unresolved wounds, their own unresolved issues that sometimes they project onto our experience. And so, coaches are skillfully trained on how to be neutral in that experience so that they actually create the space for you to get the clarity without them bringing their own emotional stuff into the space. And that's, I think, very unique. Therapists also are skilled in doing that as well. And so that's important. So it's the space of having a neutral party, but then that space of the accountability. Because if you have an emotional layer on top, if you're talking to a friend and you said, hey, let's be accountability buddies, well, sometimes that can work, but oftentimes maybe that person, is emotionally invested in you going one direction and you get the clarity that you want to go in a very different direction. And then they, end up creating, feel frustrated for you and end up bringing that into the space. That's not going to support you. If you get clarity, that you need to leave your job and move to a different city, you need someone who, regardless of whatever decision you make, is going to be there and empowering you to follow that clarity forward and to have the accountability to keep following up. Because as we grow, my experience is every time we grow, people often ask, oh, well, I work a lot with people on fears. And people ask, well, if I resolve my fears, on this particular issue, will that be it? And the answer is no. Every time I believe every time our soul is ready to evolve to the next level, we're ready to expand a little bit further, then we get scared. And so fears will start to show up every time we're ready to, we're on the brink of a big transformation, which I believe happens multiple times in our lifetime if we're open to it. Then fear will come up because it's whatever you need to release, whatever old parts of your identity you need to let go of in order to step into this next phase of your life. It's going to be sitting there right in front of you. And if you're courageous enough to look at it, which a coach can help you do, then you can move forward and start to take those action steps forward and have the accountability to actually make it happen, rather than having fear shut you down and or an emotional wrap up from your friends and family and their opinions to slow you down.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, you had mentioned before how you had to find your soul purpose to get past the physical manifestations from not living your purpose. So as a coach, you can help people find that. Is that something that you do?
Yeah, so that is something that I do, and it's a combination of coaching and energy healing and medicine work that I do with people. So the work that I do is very integrative and intuitive. And most oftentimes, people have clues about what their soul alignment is based on when they were children. A lot of people have a lot of clarity about who they were when they were children, and then often move into something else. So for example, I worked with a client who also worked in the government, was a tenured government employee. And when she was young, she always had this dream of opening up her own shop. And when we started doing work together and we started exploring, kind of reconnecting her to that younger version of herself and exploring who she was and getting clarity about that, it became really clear that, what she really wanted to do still until this day was to open up her own shop. So she's in the process of opening her doors later this year to a new maker space that's extremely innovative and allows her to express her creativity. And she left her government job and she just went for it. She wrote a business plan and she ended up winning a grant competition that basically covers from the state of Maryland that will cover her space opening and her rent for as long as she needs to open this makerspace. So once she did that, everything just kind of fell in place. And I always tell clients when they uncover what they're really feeling called to do and they have the courage to follow it, it often happens much faster than they imagine. And that was the case for me as well. When I got clarity that my path was really to do the coaching and healing work that I do now in teaching yoga and meditation, it was within 6 months that things came together. I was actually on a leave from unpaid leave from my job to just take space and see what I wanted to do. And I ended up getting so many clients that came to me just by word of mouth and by interesting coincidences that I had a choice that I either was going to go back to my government job and basically have to give up all of my clients because I couldn't take them, and or I had to leave my government job, and I ended up leaving my job.
Oh, wow. Okay. So it really came together for you.
Yes.
So how do you go back to your childhood and find those clues to find what your purpose is?
Mm-hmm. So, you can ask simple questions like, who was I as a child? If I were to use qualities to describe, adjective words to describe who I was, how would I describe who I was? What did I experience joy in doing when I was, age 3, 5, 7, 12, 13? For myself, for example, it became very clear that when I was young, I did a lot of writing, and I always wanted to be a writer. And I had this very, very strong, deep connection with nature. And I understand now as a healer, because I do a lot of the healing work I do is based on shamanism and Native American traditions and animal medicine. And I recognize now that strong link that I had when I was a child to nature is really following through now into this healing work I'm doing, and in the regular writing that I do on a weekly basis through the joy tips that I write on my website. So I uncovered that by recognizing that I always felt this really strong pull to write. I felt that that's what I was meant to do from a young child, and so that's part of the work that I'm doing, and then a closer look at recognizing how much time I spent in nature. So a lot of it for myself personally was, starting to really reconnect with nature and spending time in it, and recognizing that there's a lot of things that I actually really love, like hiking and camping, that as a even young adult I had never connected to. And once I started really doing, I tell people often, do things that you did when you were a child. If you loved dancing, go take a dance class. If you loved painting, do some painting. If you, if people described you as always a very social person, and you find that lately over the last couple of years you've kind of withdrawn, maybe put yourself out there in more social spaces. It's just by doing and embodying some more of our childlike spirit that then this clarity starts to come through, because we're aligning basically with our original blueprint of who we are.
Okay, so you kind of look back, see what you like to do as a child, mm-hmm. what you spend a lot of time doing, and then do some more of that as an adult. I like the sound of that. That sounds like fun.
Yeah, because how many of us, I feel like if I took a poll, the majority of people really, especially clients when I talk to them, the majority of people I talk to when I ask them about what they did when they were a child, most of them don't do it anymore. They disconnected from it. And it often comes from a place of self-judgment. At a certain point, I didn't think I was a good enough painter, so I stopped painting. Or, in my case, what happened was I had a high school teacher. I wrote and wrote and wrote, and I won writing competitions when I was younger, and I just loved writing. And I was a very creative writer. And when I got to high school, I finally was convinced to go to an advanced program for English. And for all the years before, I didn't want to do any of the advanced programs. I wanted to be with everyone else. So I finally agreed, and I got into that program. I was always a straight A student, and the first paper I got back had a red line through it, and it said F.
Oh.
And Yeah. And yes, exactly. Imagine as a straight A student for years, what does this do to you? It's extremely, extremely disempowering. And when I asked the teacher about it, she told me creative writing won't get you into college and it won't get you through life. And that was the day the creative writer inside of me died for a long time.
Oh, wow.
And,
Yeah.
and many of us have these wounding moments that we don't know, acknowledge, and they hide inside of our bodies, and they often show up as physical conditions. So a lot of the work I do with people is helping them as much as tune into their child, as much as recognize what thoughts are you thinking now? Where did those thoughts actually come from? Who said that you're not a good writer, right? Through my exploration, the story of why I wasn't a good writer was because of that, ninth grade teacher. That wasn't my story. It was her story. So then it was a process of rewiring my mind to understand that that was not my story. And once I started, releasing that, I started actually giving myself permission to write again, just for writing's sake. Then the writer inside of me started coming back through again.
Oh, I see. I had a similar experience as a child with a teacher. It's amazing how our teachers as children can have such either a positive influence or a negative one. But I had a math teacher who, if you made a question, and he would say, "What are you, stupid?" He would say it to a lot of the kids in the class. And, it's complex mathematics, doing quadratic equations. It's like, we're not stupid. It's like, this is complicated. And maybe you're not a very good teacher at the end of the day. So, but we need to go back and realize that, it's not that I was not good at math. That's not it. And I'm not stupid. But it's the teacher has that ability to wound us, and we have to go back and try and figure out how to heal that. And so the best way to do that is just to go back and, I guess, think about it cognitively and realize that it's not you. Is that what you would recommend? Or?
Well, you can do it, I think, two different directions. I work with clients and teach them two different ways. One is cognitively, you can check out your thoughts. Just notice, like, what is your story about a situation, and write the whole story out. Be really clear about what it is. So let's take, for example, the example of writing for me. Going and sitting with myself and for a moment just writing, what is my story about why I can't write, and getting very clear about that. And then going back at it and looking very clearly and, underlying what beliefs are in there. What are some definitive statements that I'm making that are actual beliefs? Can I acknowledge that those are beliefs? Which beliefs don't mean facts. Beliefs just mean I've bought into that idea. So that's the first step, is being really clear about how you're actually understanding things. Now, for some people, that process isn't so clear. You can't go through it cognitively. So then the question becomes, when I'm thinking about writing, where does it show up in my body? And let's say it shows up in my heart center. Then that's where the story is going to lie. I have to go through my body to uncover the story to be able to begin healing. So I can do that by sitting with my body, sitting with my heart center and recognizing, okay, where do I feel it? Asking questions like, how does it feel? What is the size of the sensation? So it actually starts to get me really into the somatic experience of that. Once I'm actually into the somatic experience of that, then I can sit there and I can ask a series of questions and then just see what comes up for me. I could ask a question like, dear heart center, what message do you have for me? What story are you holding there? And then just be quiet and listen as if I'm actually talking to another person. I'd listen to my body. I'd notice, does any physical changes happen? And people are surprised when they do this, how powerful it is. I was working with a client this week where she was reacting to a friend. There was a friend that had done something, first of all, text message is always problematic, but they were engaging back and forth, and this person really felt like her friend was disregarding this entire history that they have together of her actually showing up and being there for her friend. So she was taking it really personal, but she really was not clear why. The more we talked about it and kind of explored through her mind, it was really unclear why. So we decided to go through her body, and through that process, we connected in the area where it was in her body. And as she connected with that area in her body and started asking questions like, okay, what story are you holding here for me? This image of her when she was a child on the playground and being rejected came up. And it was this story, this recognition that she had in the moment of trying to appease this group of girls to be friends with them. She had almost betrayed herself because she almost did something that was very scary to her. And in the end, she had decided not to do what felt really frightening and the other girls were doing that seemed like a little daredevil-y on the playground. She decided not to do that. And in that process, then she felt rejected. And when she felt that, she found this story, all of this energy came up that had been trapped there of sadness came through, and she started crying. And as she started crying, it was this cathartic release of this holding that she had had for years of her, 10-year-old self or whatever it was. And the number of times that she in friendships had felt the same thing over and over again. And so, we don't think about that. Our body holds so much information. And, sometimes when we have a physical situation, there can be other underlying things happening underneath. I can't deny that I, for example, have Lyme's disease. I was diagnosed with that in this last year. So there are physical symptoms that show up for me that are just realities of that disease. However, oftentimes, physical symptoms that show up for us are deeply connected to purely emotional things. Purely emotional wounds that we haven't looked at, we haven't addressed, we haven't explored. And the key is, do you have the courage to explore them? And if you have the courage to explore them, then that's where you can actually start to connect to your intuition, because you start to make space. And then as you exercise that courage of turning towards what really feels uncomfortable, there's this amazing freedom that comes through, because you recognize that you have the power. You have way more power than you believe you do to chart your own life, like your own captain, really.
Oh, okay. I'd like to delve in a bit more into the energy body, because so much we store things in our energy body. I don't really understand much about it, but I know our body is not just a chunk of meat. There's so much more going on there. There's energy fields, and there's biochemistry and electricity flowing, and so I'm curious about I see that you're a Reiki practitioner, so I wonder if you could explain a bit about Reiki and the energy body and how emotions get tied into that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Reiki, it's so interesting to be on your podcast talking about all of this, because if any of your listeners out there are feeling, this feels a little bit too woo-woo to me.
Yeah.
I understand, because honestly, I was the ultra rational, anti-woo-woo person for the longest time. For example, when I looked for my first meditation teacher, I reached out to a friend who I knew was connected to the Buddhist meditation community. And my direct message to her was, I don't want a woo-woo teacher. So I understand the resistance, because honestly, we've been acculturated to understand that rational equals truth. But when you look at just even your life, and before I get into this energy thing, I think that's really important to recognize, that really question the question of rationality. When you look at your life, and let's say you look at just this day, you look at the morning and when you woke up, and you had probably a plan of how you wanted things to go. Life happened in the middle of that, and it was not rational. Either the subway train got delayed, or you ended up having a conversation with a stranger that you never planned to meet, or you ended up, getting a phone call from a family member that you weren't expecting. None of that is rational nor predictable. And so when we really acknowledge that, it starts to open us up to recognizing that maybe even we as beings, our minds and our systems are far maybe less rational than we want them to be. And that feels scary, because it feels like you can't control it. But it's really in the process of, ironically, it's in the process of letting go of control that you actually start to gain control, because you start to understand that things are far more nuanced than you expect. And with Reiki, that's absolutely the case. Reiki is a tradition. Many people, there's different conflicting stories about how far does Reiki, or basically using hands to heal, go back. Some tradition, there's a tradition in India called pranic healing. And pranic healing, some stories trace their lineage back actually to Jesus. There's some stories that say that Jesus or some of Jesus's disciples ended up spreading the tradition of healing hands to India. And so there's this recognition that that we are energy beings, and that if we recognize that our system is energetic, then we can actually channel a bigger energy that's out there. That's basically the energy that's moving everything. You know, the energy life force that's moving plants. You know, plants are growing and moving on their own. Animals are moving on their own. Whatever is moving me. That there's some energy field out there, right? And when we really look at it, we look at, even from a physics standpoint, animals, humans, inanimate objects are essentially just atoms, protons, and electrons. But the way that we perceive things is that it's all different. So if you can recognize, even at a physics level, that it's all atoms, electrons, protons, then we understand that there's just this energy field that we are both made of and existing in at all times. And Reiki is recognizing that. And therefore, if you recognize that there is this energy field, that you both are part of it, and there's a broader energy field, then you can use your own energy, channeling that greater energy field, to start making shifts in people. And, you know, the easiest way that people can start to just even experiment with this and see, like, well, what's up with this this energy work is, you know, you can take your palms and you can rub them together, and you can notice that they can make heat. And if you rub them together long enough and then you hold them apart, you could just notice, what do you feel between your hands? And oftentimes, if you really tune into it, you'll feel a vibration between your hands. Well, where is that vibration coming from? There's some sort of energy that's between your hands that's happening there. So, you know, that's even the case of, for example, massage. Why is massage so healing? Yes, it moves your tissues, but there's also some energy transfer that's happening there. Even just the heat of someone's hand is an energy transfer into your body.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it a little bit. So we store our emotions in our energy body, our energy fields. Is that accurate? And I don't know, how do we work that out? How do we?
Good question. I mean, that's really, you know, that there's so many wonderful practices and ways that people could do that. One is, you know, yoga, or honestly, just any sort of movement. For example, when trauma researchers study animals, they notice when animals experience a traumatic event, I'm not sure if you've heard of this, but they actually shake off.
Oh, yes.
And, right. Yeah. So it's a somatic process that they do by taking the body and shaking off the trauma. So animals instinctively know that emotions affect their bodies, and then they therefore shift their energy by doing that. But we're not, we're not basically accustomed, educated, or acknowledged that that's the case for us as well. So, you know, people can do things, for example, like doing something like shaking out your wrists. Sometimes you're feeling really stressed out. Just shake your wrists side to side. Just notice how you feel differently. You know, doing some sort of movement, like if you're in an office and you start to feel overwhelmed or even fatigued, moving around the body. So even just moving the body by walking around the block can make a huge difference. Doing things like yoga. Yoga is a very, very ancient system that inside of it is infused this understanding of the energy body based on how the postures are designed and put together. And another great resource that people can do, there's two other ones that I really like. One is something called Emotional Freedom Technique. And if people go to YouTube, there's this really wonderful man. His YouTube channel is EFT Wizard. And he has tons of videos there on tapping, which is this process of using your fingers to tap on your meridian lines or your acupuncture points. I always describe it to people that it's like acupuncture without needles. And you can do that. And what they've actually found with practices like EFT or other energy medicine practices is that it actually, let's say your brain is really stressed out. Let's say your brain is really engaged, which means the amygdala, the threat center of your brain, is very activated. if that's the case and you do something like a tapping practice or some of these mind-body practices like breathing, it actually signals to your mind that everything is okay, and it starts to allow your brain to start to shift down. So by working through your body, you can actually start to shift what's happening in your mind. And that's why practices like yoga are called mind-body practices. And another great one that I really like, if people Google a woman named Donna Eden, she's this lovely spirit. She's so joyful. She will definitely make you smile. And she has lots of videos online of these energy medicine, very short energy medicine routines that you can do on a daily basis to reset yourself. So I recommend people try experimenting with those and just notice, how do you feel when you start to experience that? How do you feel when you try on these practices for size? And then second of all, just notice, where does stress show up in my body? Can I start to actually tune into that and just notice, for example, when I'm angry, wow, my heart center gets really tight. Or when I'm feeling frustrated, my gut is gripping. That's just your body giving you, it's just your energy, really, your intuition, using your body as a vehicle to give you information about what's happening. And you can start to shift that by even just noticing it in the first place.
Fantastic. I like to experiment. I like to try new things, and especially when you can just go online and check something out and give it a try and see if it works for you. Like, why not?
Right. Yeah, that's essentially how it happened for me. It was just, through lots and lots and lots of experimentation. And I think that's really important. We have to acknowledge that we don't need to know everything ourselves. We don't need to, just because you're experiencing stress or frustration or overwhelm, or if you're feeling apathetic like I was, where you've lost interest in things that you normally love, it's just an opportunity to expand. And so if you do things like Google and try on different practices for size, or reach out to an expert, like hiring a coach or a therapist or a healer, it's just an opportunity to just see what happens. And through that experimentation process, at the very least, you'll learn more about yourself.
Fantastic. We're coming up on our time here. So I like to ask the question, what is the good news about achieving excellent health in our modern world?
What is the good news?
Yeah, I would like to end on a positive note always. So.
Yeah, that's excellent. I think the good news is that it's possible, right? I think the good news is that if we really listen to our bodies and honor ourselves, then good health is possible. I think a challenge is that a lot of people feel pressured to follow specific diets or follow specific exercise routines or follow specific techniques. And really, it's all about listening to what works for you. And if you just simply pay attention to what works for you, what shifts based on what you eat and the practices you try, then good health is possible and available to you. And you are your own expert, really, by paying attention to your own body. And that's, I think, the beauty of that.
Absolutely. So what is the best way to find your work?
Sure. The best way for people to find me is to look me up online at www.marcymoberg.com, and I'm all over social media. And there they can learn more about the one-on-one work I do with people, as well as an online course that I've just launched called the Unstuck Method. And it's a repeatable method that people can learn from the comfort of their home online, based on lots and lots of hours of one-on-one work with people. And how do you get unstuck? What are some simple practices you can do to release emotional energy, to get clarity, and to make what I would call the right to-do list, which is a to-do list based on who you need to be and how you translate that into doing to actually move forward from feeling stuck.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for being on the show today, Marcy.
Thank you so much for having me.
All righty. You have a great day.
You too.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
We have reached the end of this episode. I hope you have found a piece of information you can use to improve your life or the life of your loved ones with. If you feel that I've helped you in some way, I ask that you help me in return. Liking, rating, reviewing, sharing, and or subscribing all help me rise in the search engine rankings so I can reach and help even more people. Subscribing being the most important one. Thanks in advance. As always, I will continue to bring you The health stuff you need to know.